Today, I am blessed and highly favored to be speaking with two amazing gentlemen, Caleb Perri and Derek Lambert. Caleb and Derek, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, appreciate being here.
It's great to have you both. And Caleb, I want to come back to you in just a minute, but I'm going to start with Derek. Derek and I are sort of co-hosting today. I asked Derek if he could come in today because some important parts of Caleb's story parallel Derek's, vice versa. So in some of the discussion parts, Derek will be able to have more insights and ask better questions. Derek is in North Carolina. He's a good friend, and he runs two YouTube channels. One of them is called Myth Vision. That's probably what he's most known for. And Myth Vision is kind of, what would you say? It's an information superhighway regarding the origins of Judaism, Christianity, the Bible, and all sorts of related topics. And a lot of us who deconverted from Christianity after we realized it's just mythology and legend, we became really curious, like, what was this? What was this Stockholm syndrome that was happening? What were we stuck in, and how it affects our lives and their culture around us? Derek interviews a bunch of scholars who shed light on the Bible and all that. He and his brother Kurt also speak on their YouTube channel, Rewired Addiction, where they talk about recovery from drug addiction. They focus on things like building yourself up, building your resources, your community to get strong in your journey through addiction and recovery, and the efforts to stay clean and to help others around us who are struggling to stay clean. I'll have the links to Derek's two channels beneath our video. Please go like, subscribe, comment, everything, view. His stuff is beyond amazing, and I watch his stuff just about every single day. It's that important. So Derek, could you take a couple minutes and just tell us more about you and about your channels?
Sure, and thanks for the awesome opening. I'm a human being, man. I'm like any other young guy in America whose mom and dad were raised Catholic and Pentecostal, so Christian. And I was very curious, even from a young age, about wanting to understand the truth. I had a little inner dialogue between me and what I called God. And to skip forward ahead for me, I eventually called it higher power, which taps into this whole recovery scheme that we will be touching on today. And then a year after I had been sober and clean, which is something that we'll get into, and I don't want to take any thunder from Caleb in terms of his story, because this is what I'm interested to hear what he says. I realized I was talking to myself that whole time, and it was me all along. The 2 feet in the sand was me. No one was carrying me. I was carrying myself. And I realized that it was a social construct of humans that helped save me. But we're skipping ahead because I was like any other typical person who had to go through emotional deconversion scenario to escape the emotional attachments I had to the faith and everything that I thought was absolute fact based off my feelings. I started to figure out a lot more about this. How could I compare mine to everyone else? Everyone else has the same experience. How come atheists have the same experience and they say they don't believe in a God? Is this just a human thing? And so I come back to the beginning. I'm just a human. So thanks for introducing me, brother.
That's awesome. And just to give again another plug, Myth Vision. If you haven't watched it, absolutely everybody who's interested in learning Christian origins needs to be on it. You have amazing guests every single week. So we appreciate what you do there. And I know I'm speaking for literally thousands of people and saying your channels change our lives. And our other guest, our main guest here is Caleb Perri. So Caleb, again, welcome. This guest is going to make me feel really old. You know why? Because I babysat Caleb and his sister when they were just little kids. So your presence here calls out my age. Caleb's dad was a youth pastor at a church that I grew up in. So I sat under his dad's teaching and preaching and mentorship. And I'm just reading here a few notes here, and then I'll put my eyes back up. Our youth group that I was in with your dad, we traveled, for example, to Ohio to a Baptist summer camp together. We did many service projects in places like the Badlands of Philadelphia, which is a section of Philly known for open air recreational drug markets and drug related violence. We worked together with Open Air Campaigners, which is a street preaching organization that uses the paint boards. You probably remember that, where you kind of do the paintings and you can't see the words until you fill in the little black parts of it, and then the words pop out. We probably did some soup kitchen work together along the line. We went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic together, where we worked on building walls for a new church. And one of the teams, I don't know if you remember this story, but one of the teams on that trip, at least the one that I was on, he was swinging a big pickaxe and he went right into the dirt, digging to lay foundation for the church building. And apparently there was a buried power line. And I mean, sparks just went like a rainbow above him. I mean, it took out the electricity for the whole block for, I think, a week. but thankfully it was a wooden handle, so it didn't travel up to him. But that was a close call there. And of course, I supported his dad in the regular weekly events for the church, which was a major part of my world during my teenage years. So I have a lot of background with Caleb's dad. The last time I saw you was when you were a little boy, and we just crossed paths via my YouTube channel. Excuse me. And I just really appreciate Caleb for reaching out, reconnecting, being willing to walk through his story with us today. And so Caleb, again, welcome to the show. Could you take a few minutes and just tell us about you, what you're up to, and who is Caleb Perri?
Yeah, my name is Caleb Perri. My dad was your youth leader back in the day, so has been a while. I basically, just grew up in the church. Grew up with my dad was mostly almost a pastor for a while, a pastor, and then a youth pastor for a while. So I grew up very deep into the church. Grew up in the youth group, started the youth worship team, all that kind of stuff. Was very deep into everything, and just went kind of through life. Went to culinary school after high school. Was only there for about a year and a half before I dropped out because of the drug use that got involved. Eventually ended up going to rehab where I went to Florida for a few years and then moved back up here to help out with my grandparents and just kind of felt homesick. And now I'm back up here and, it was just kind of a long journey, long, interesting journey of a lot of fun stuff and a lot of negative stuff too, but got through the end.
So you're back in Pennsylvania now?
Yes, I'm back with the parents right now.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, I appreciate you being here. We're going to go into a lot of the stuff you just brushed over there, but I love to start just by asking people to talk us through your story. Take us way back. What was it like growing up, and especially as it relates to your faith? What was the main components of your worldview, of your faith? What did you believe in? Especially, what did you believe? Take us from the beginning, but take us up to the point of what, if and when you had what you would call a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Okay, so I guess basically from the beginning part of my life I can remember, it's always been some part of God or some part of Christianity was involved. I remember at 5 years old, accepting the Lord into my heart with my dad in the basement and doing all that thing, not really understanding what I was doing, just following along. And I remember that immediate sense of I have to do this thing, otherwise this bad thing happens, always kind of stuck in the back of my head in a weird way, where it was like, okay, you're telling a 5-year-old that he has to accept someone he doesn't know, doesn't understand, really wouldn't understand even if you told him because he's 5, and then just telling him to do something, and that's supposed to save the rest of his life. Just always kind of felt odd to me. But through there, it was always going to youth or going to church with my parents, going to Sunday school every Sunday. And I always felt like I had a personal relationship with a God or whoever it was at that point. I don't know if I would have honestly called it God. I just didn't think this was all an accident at that point. I wasn't like sold into the religion. I was just like, yeah, I don't know if this is all just happened. But eventually got to, I think it was shortly after my father was let go from the Blue Church, because I think there was a part where they were trying to become a pastor, and I remember him walking out of there in tears. And to me, to see him in that state that I had never seen him before, just because the church said he couldn't be a pastor didn't make sense to me. I'd seen him do everything right. He said all the right things. He did everything he possibly could to get there, and then they told him no. And it was like, well, why? Is there not enough time for him to preach, or is it just an ego thing? And that really threw me through a loop too. And I think that drove me farther away from just the religion in general. So I still went to Sunday school. I still went to church with my parents. We ended up switching churches, and we went to a really small church that basically my dad had known the pastor a while back, and then they moved back to Pennsylvania. So I went to their church.
Was that a vineyard church?
Yeah, it was the Blue Vineyard. Yeah. And when we first went there, I think I was 7 or 8, I believe. And the only other kids in the entire church were the pastor's 2 sons and his daughter, and then me and my sister. So that was our whole youth group for most of my early teen to mid high school years. So when that started, they were my best friends. We hang out all the time. So my friends were in the church. I went to Delaware County Christian School at the same time. So every part of my world, church was on Sunday. Saturday was the only day that didn't have anything religious related, I guess. So it was always very pressing into be religious, be religious, be religious. And that always rubbed me the wrong way. But then youth group, when I finally got to the age of youth group, and stop me if I'm jumping around all over the place. I tend to jump back and forth. But so I think when at 12, at 12 to 13, I would think I was about 13 at the time, but our youth group was it was just me, my sister, the two sons, John and Jared, and then Jessie, the daughter. And that was it. It was the five of us for the longest time. So I had just learned how to play guitar. So I learned the 4 chords necessary to play every worship song and started the worship team for my youth group. And it was just me playing guitar and singing. We were just the 5 of us with our youth leader in the basement of the church at the time. And when that started, music has always been something deeper to me than I think it is to most people. So when the music and then the religious part got added to the music, that's really when my brain started to go, oh God, okay, I understand. Oh, I believe this. Okay. Oh, and everything started clicking from what I had been told my whole life. So singing the songs during the worship time or during church on Sundays was always almost a euphoric feeling because, you're just letting free, you're singing the song, everyone feels good, it's the group think or whatever, and you just kind of get lost in it. And to me, that always felt like something deeper than my brain just doing what a brain does. It was always, oh, well, God's bringing me into this space and all this kind of stuff. And that went on for a while. I think it was closer towards 9th into 10th grade. I was still at Delaware County Christian School all the way up until 10th grade when I went to public school. But 9th into 10th grade was a little weird because I remember having a few experiences outside of church with the friends that I had from church, but they went to public school. So they hung out with other kids that weren't Christian. And I remember we were hanging out with them one night and I ended up smoking a cigarette at some point. And so that started, and then I started smoking cigarettes and all this kind of stuff. And I would hear the other people not inside the Christian bubble talk. And it was almost like breaking that myth of I had always been told public school's bad, public school's bad, public school kids are bad. Like if you go to public school, you're not a good person somehow. And I didn't really believe that for a long time, but 10th grade, when I did leave Delaware County Christian School, I just went to Springfield High School, and it was just a normal public school. I left because my sister and my older sister was about to graduate. She only had one more year. My younger sister was just in elementary school, so I left so they could stay because we just couldn't afford to keep all 3 of us there. And I remember not even maybe a month after I had left the Christian school, I was in the public school, and one weekend I had talked to one of my friends from Delaware County Christian School on Facebook at some point and asked if he wanted to hang out, and we were going to, but then a week later he messaged me back saying that his mom said he wasn't allowed to because he wasn't allowed to hang out with kids outside of the Christian school. So since I was in public school, he wasn't allowed to hang out with me anymore. That really rubbed me the wrong way. When these people that I had literally, it's like I had grown up with these people. I had been at the Christian school from kindergarten all the way to 10th grade with the same kids the whole time. Like, the 72 kids in your class better than you want to know anybody. And then to leave and have them all just be like, oh, well, you go to public school now. It's like, yeah, but I still do worship on Sundays. I still go to church and everything. So that didn't make sense to me, that dichotomy of just completely, okay, just because you're in a different place automatically makes you not good or you're dirty all of a sudden. And I think that was probably the biggest turning point before I went to college, just because after losing so many friends that I did know so well, I dug in even deeper into the youth group. So I was even more with the only other people I knew, and they became pretty much my only friends. And I'm still friends with the one of them. One that's not as religious anymore is the one I'm friends with, and the one that is doesn't really talk to me anymore, which I think is funny. But that was definitely a turning point to see all those people just completely jump ship just because of public school. And that, when I dug deeper into the youth group, I think that was when I felt that I had some personal relationship with God, but I was angry at who I thought he was, because I was like, all this stuff in your book tells me people aren't going to do that, and then they do that, and it happens over and over again, and I've seen it happen to multiple people, and I'm just confused. So that went on, and I never said anything to my youth pastors about any of this stuff. I never brought it up to anybody. You know, every youth retreat was always the same. It was always pray for me, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. But it was always just kind of that nagging feeling of something isn't right. Something doesn't add up with the way the book is written and the way the people that preach that book are acting. And then that was just kind of my underlying thoughts for a while.
Can I
doing the youth.
a question?
Mm-hmm.
What at that point where you're still very much a believer, very much doing the worship thing, if someone had come to you at that point and said, hey, I'm not a Christian, but I'm thinking about it, what does it mean to be a Christian? How do I have a relationship with God? You know, you talk about in your songs or your services how to have a relationship with God, how to have peace with God through Jesus. I'm not sure what that means. You know, you talk about this gospel. I've heard that word many times, but what does it mean? Like, what are you saying? What would you have said to somebody? Like, what is the gospel? What is the way to have peace with God in that context?
I think the first thing I would have done is tried to get them to come to youth group with me. That's what I did with just about every single one. I mean, because that's a situation I was in multiple times. It's not even a hypothetical. A couple of my friends from Springfield that I had tried, they asked me one time, they were like, what do you do? Where do you go to youth group, I think you call it? And I was like, well, why don't you come with me? And you can see what it's like. And they came with me, and then, they had all the questions. They were like, well, that was really fun. I had a really good time. And I was like, yeah, see, it's a really happy time. Everybody's really nice. And then they'd start asking the questions, but like, who are you singing to? And then, it's the whole, well, it's God and it's somebody that created everything. It just goes to the basics. I was never very good at speaking to people. Like, music was always my thing. So I'd always get them in through the cool rock worship stuff, and then somebody else could do the talking. But I think I would have basically just boiled it down to God is somebody that you need to personally know, personally experience, and personally be involved with by reading the word and praying to him on your own and truly trying to understand and ask him what you think your life should be.
Gotcha. And yeah, I know too, just to kind of piggyback off that, it's the message that you get really with what I would have called a solid church back then is just this idea that, there's bad news and there's good news. You're unfortunately pretty much condemned from the time you're born. You're born in sin, you inherit the Adamic nature, and therefore you stand condemned from day one. But then you actively do bad things. You choose to reject God, and therefore you're kind of doubly condemned, and therefore you stand in pending judgment. You are, as it were, sinners in the hands of an angry God, waiting for your day of judgment, and that's not going to work out so well if you don't have something that comes and changes it, and the outcome would be otherwise hell. And I know some people would have different versions of hell, where it's annihilationism or something, or purgatory, but for I think for both of us, I think for all three of us, it would have been a literal hell that we grew up with. And the idea that Jesus, was the only way to solve that problem. Basically, he came and took our punishment. He, as it were, went through hell for us, took all the punishment we deserved. And it's like a legal swap. He takes our punishment, and we get his righteousness applied to us judicially. And I certainly feel I feel the need to make it clear to people, like when I do these interviews, like this is not, we're not talking about people who just the deconversions aren't where, well, we kind of went to church a few times on Christmas and Easter, and then we decided to reject it. Like, we're talking about people that sang the songs, that knew the message, that could preach it, that did preach it, that loved Jesus. This was real. And would you say that you ever felt the presence of God, in your heart during those times?
I definitely would. Like I said, like the times where I was playing guitar and singing and leading worship, or just playing bass on the side while my dad led worship, and just any part of that, I always felt like I was being hugged by God in that sense. Was always that, oh my gosh, like I'm in a totally different place right now when the music's playing, when I'm singing, like something is there with me while I'm doing that. That was my thought every time. But then once the music stopped, that kind of trails off into normal life again, but it always just brought me back once the music started. So it was always like a personal feeling of, oh, God's definitely here just because of the music.
Derek, I know I've kept you on the side for just to bring you in a second. Did you ever get involved in ministry, like in your church? Were you ever doing any kind of leadership or music?
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't do music. I wasn't a musician or anything, but I definitely got into it. I was aiming to become a pastor. I went to college and I went and got a bachelor's degree in biblical studies and theology, and started to change my views from like Calvary Chapel type Baptist type. I mean, wasn't necessarily Baptist, because most of the Baptists are once saved, always saved. The pastor at the Calvary Chapel had this kind of notion that you could fall from it, and you'd have to pick yourself back up. It's not once saved, always saved. But then I went to the college and found out about Calvinism, and then I was like, oh, this is it, And then of course you go from there and you find out, oh, this isn't all that there is, and you find out more. But I like what you said there, Caleb, because skipping ahead, just giving people a hint, that presence that you felt, or that I like to say experience, but using Christian terms, the presence of God, that experience you felt from the music. When I was trying to get off heroin, in the newspapers, there was a guy who wrote, he was interviewed trying to get off heroin, and he said, they were like, what does it feel like? And he said, it's like God comes down out of heaven and wraps his arms around you and says, everything's going to be okay. And that's what heroin felt like, is the way he described it. And I thought to myself, I remember feeling that way without doing heroin when I was in church. Something's going on here. And now I'm into science. Now I'm big into trying to understand the brain. What is an emotion? What are these experiences? Is this serotonin? And is this like a bunch of chemical releases with a social construct? And I interviewed Andy Thompson not long ago. He works for the Richard Dawkins Foundation, or with them. And he pointed out, like, back 80,000 something years ago in Africa, they had tribal dances, and they would circle the girls. The girls would sit in the center, and they would all sit and just watch the men dance to impress the women. And they'd be smiling and dancing, and they would release these endorphins, these natural chemicals that we have in our brains and our bodies. And a lot of times they did that, and it would get rid of pain, like a natural pain reliever. So there's a lot of stuff here that we just jump to conclusions because we don't understand maybe some of this stuff. As Christians, I know I didn't. It was the presence of God. Don't you tell me different. I mean, that was God. I felt the warmth when I asked him into my heart as my Lord and Savior. I felt comforted knowing something had my back. And I did the same thing when I was trying to get off heroin. So I'm teasing people because I know Caleb's going to get into his down spiral into like drug use. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's a good segue, Caleb. If you're ready to take it to the next level, feel free to take us what happens next in the story.
Yeah, for sure. So I basically the next real big departure from everything was when I ended up leaving the youth group. I was working in a restaurant, just working in the kitchen. I remember one time the two youth leaders at the time came in to see me at the restaurant and got food, and they came into the back to say hi, and I went out to see them, and I had a cigarette in my ear that I forgot about. And I remember going out to see them, and I bent down to like tie my shoe or something. Somehow the cigarette fell out of my ear onto the floor, and they both saw it. And the look they gave me after that was immediately just, how dare you? What is wrong with you? Like, you're a terrible human being for doing that. And it's like, oh, this is awkward. And then they didn't say anything about it. They just kind of went and did their thing and said goodbye. Next time I showed up for youth group, one of my other friends, the other son's pastor, not the one I talked to, the one that's still in the church, basically, he was on the stage with his guitar where the leader would go. And I was walking in with my guitar, showing up to do that. And they told me that, oh no, I wasn't doing that anymore. I had actually been removed from the worship team and that I wasn't allowed to do it anymore as the leader. I could still play on the background or the drums or something else, but I couldn't be the leader anymore. And then that kind of happened. And afterwards, I got caught in...
Nice of them to give you a heads up about it.
Yeah, I had the music picked out for that night and everything. Like, it was total blindsided. I still played that night. So I ended up singing anyway, just because the other guy didn't really know too well how to play guitar, which was kind of awkward too. But it was just really hurtful to have something that I had started myself at 13 or 12, did my entire teen to early adult life doing, and then to just blindsidedly kicked off after they found out I smoked cigarettes was a little much. Eventually, I ended up getting caught in the basement with a girl one night. That kind of really screwed the pooch and got me completely kicked out of the youth group altogether. So that's when I stopped doing that. Yeah, exactly. But that was really the last turning point. So when I got kicked out of the youth group, I still felt like I had a connection or a relationship with God in some way, but it wasn't like it was. It wasn't like I had been, where I was almost every day trying to do something related to religion. So I remember leaving there, still hung out with the one friend, the other one that the other pastor's son. I still hung out with him, did all throughout high school, even to college, even now still sometimes. But like after I left, I just stopped going. I would go to church on Sundays. I think I still played in the youth or the worship team for the main church service every once in a while. I would play bass or drums or something like that. So I was still involved in church. And like I said, I still felt I had a personal relationship, but it wasn't strong. It wasn't something that somebody could have pressed me on and I would have not turned around and just been like, no, I don't believe. I was kind of in the middle of everything. Just having those people that you know so well, that know you so well, see one or two things wrong, and it's immediately like you can't have anybody around him. He's dirty. And it made me feel dirty. Like, I felt like I was a terrible human being, which obviously cigarettes are not the best thing. We all know that. And what I did in the basement, that probably wasn't the best thing to do during youth group. I totally understand that. But to just kick me out from everything I had known basically my entire life, that was too much for me to handle. So that really put the nail in the coffin and was like, okay, well, this religion thing I'll do myself, but church is just for worship. And then I would leave during the service. I didn't really care.
Can I remember real quick about that? Mm-hmm. One of the things that comes up a lot, I think, for a lot of Christians is this idea of, we all go through seasons where we feel more worldly than we should. We felt more like we were being selfish and not focusing on God. We weren't certainly doing our devotions enough, and whether it was by choice or just working too many hours or whatever. But a lot of us had this I think this background mentality of like, I know that my future is to be more and more committed to Christ. I'm sure you remember the song, I don't want to be a casual Christian. I want to light up the night with an everlasting light. I want to be on fire for Jesus Christ. Did you feel like that was like, it sounds like you weren't yet questioning your faith at that point, but was it like, I'm going through some stuff, but I know my goal here is to sort this stuff out and get back on track to be just, tight with Christ and to be making a difference for the gospel and for the kingdom? Would you say that was reflective of you, or did you feel like you were already drifting away from that kind of like, I'm really got to get back to Christ on this?
I think that feeling more came when the friends I had from the school stopped talking to me. I think when like that, getting back to Christ was never a thought I had after I left the youth group. It was always just, okay, I understand, and I still believe, I guess, in a way. I'll still pray every once in a while, but I don't think it was ever I need to get back to Christ kind of thing. It was just, okay, I'm a Christian, but this is life, so I'm going to go do my thing if you guys don't like me for what I do. So I don't think I would have been very hard pressed to walk away at that point either. So it's kind of like very, very on the precipice.
Gotcha. And it sounds like you were kind of already behind the scenes making some maybe unintentional and subconscious choices to deconstruct maybe not the faith, but just your walk with Christ. And it's funny that mine was very similar. I wouldn't have, long before I started my investigation into the origins of Christianity and Judaism and the Bible, I had a lot of conversations with other people and sort of with myself about like things that just didn't add up. Like jobs, for example, jobs where I was required to work every Sunday. And it was like, God, don't you want me to be in church with my family on Sundays? Like, why would you make this job that I have to have it to pay the bills, to support my family. I'm supposed to be a provider. Just like little things would add up. And it wasn't like I was intentionally trying to deconstruct. It just didn't feel as close. Derek, did you ever have, what I'm talking about? Does that?
Yeah. I've experienced the same exact stuff you guys are describing here. And you go through highs and lows, and then you get close to God again, and then you get away, or something ends up allowing you to be closer, or you end up shifting to a new place. For me, I was able to move to different churches often. I didn't have to stick to one, whereas your dad was probably involved in yours, Caleb. So it was kind of like you had to keep coming back around the same people. I could start fresh.
Yeah.
Which allowed my relationship with Jesus to start fresh. Isn't that amazing? Now, I'm not trying to knock people's faith, man. I get it. And the fact that you were a worship leader, you're one of the most important people in modern church that there is. I mean, look at Hillsong United. Like Hillsong, dude, go play a song as an atheist of theirs and listen to the words and just let the music hit you, right? This is just someone as a skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate. I can get back in that mindset and just feel it and be like, wow, this is positive music. This feels good. But they're like putting it out here into this thing that will send you to hell if you aren't doing what you're supposed to or saying the right words, but it loves you. It just, it is kind of crazy. So, but my relationship was just, like you said, it became more I could never lock into the crowd. I always ended up kind of being a lone wolf, so to speak. I don't know. It was weird. I never knew who I was, if that makes sense. I was always changing and I could never figure myself out. It was heavy metal, Slipknot. I'd listen to this heavy stuff, Mudvayne, Slipknot, hardcore stuff, Godsmack, and didn't really like that name because it's talking smack about God. But, I'd dabble there and then I'd go back and I'd get really into Jesus. And then I'd come back and it'd be hip hop and I'd be a skateboarder. And then I'd go back and I'd be BMX biking. And then, I always kept doing things in the church. I never fit into that crowd of like a normal, I go to church and I live a normal life. No, I was always like testing the boundaries of the world around me. And it caused me to look like a black sheep. I stood out.
Yeah. And I think I'm almost exactly the same because Slipknot was my favorite band in 8th grade, and I remember having to hide the CD that one of my friends at school gave me from my mom, and it was like, so because even though I was the worship leader for so long, and I did have that true sense of a relationship in the background, I guess from an early perspective, those youth trips or the mission trips when I was 5, 7, and 9 or whatever it was, I remember just basically shaping my view of being a good Christian means doing good things for other people. Regardless of what you do in your own life, that doesn't matter. It's only what you do towards the world, not what you do in yourself. So for me, it was always, everybody's going to see me as a good person. But when I'm in my room, I'm listening to death metal, Slipknot, I'm playing violent video games, like all that kind of stuff that's just super frowned upon. But it was always like that kind of, if somebody had gotten into my brain when I was not with anybody else and seeing what I was thinking, they would have been like, "You're not a Christian at all, I don't think. I'm not sure what you believe, but I don't think you're a Christian." But then I would have told you, well, but no, I have a relationship with God. When I sing the songs, it makes me feel that. So I was definitely always that black sheep of the family too.
Jeez.
I was kind of on the other side of that for the most part, although I certainly had a few rock bands I used to like that I don't think everyone would have agreed with, like Heart. Loved listening to Heart with their Heartbeat, but probably not hard compared to what you guys are talking about. But it's funny though, whether you have stuff that's actively on the outside, like, hey, you're smoking a cigarette, you're listening to this music, whatever. The reality is that for a lot of people, you can look really good on the outside and play the part. But I know people that, myself included, like you know that there's other things going on behind the scenes. And it's funny to me, and this is a side note, I don't want to sidetrack as much as to say this, and we'll get right back to your story, but I feel like one of the biggest struggles for a lot of Christians is that it does create this double world where you have to look good. You have to look like a worship leader. You have to look like a minister of some sort. And for some people, it's naturally easier to just be the good kid. Yeah. And that's great. I was sort of one of those, but not always. But I understand both sides. But like, it creates this world where if you're kind of drifting into like, oh, I think I do want to smoke a cigarette. Oh, I do want to listen to this music. You know that certain people cannot know that. And so you create this facade, and it's amazing. But for a lot of people, it really does create a double life. And it's almost like, I forget what the psychological word is. What is it when you have two personalities?
Are you talking about schizophrenic? Or?
Yeah, like bipolar?
Bipolar or schizophrenic, one of those. But where like you're basically two people, and you found a way to manage them very, very well. But it's like, if people really, you have this inside fear that always comes of, if people really knew what I was, if they knew that, for example, all the preachers are saying, when that girl walks by and she's got a low cut blouse on, you're going to accidentally look once. We all do. Don't look twice. You're the kid that's going to look 3 times, and you want to make sure that no one sees you, but you want to be, that person that people think is the good one. And for the people that can't measure up, they just kind of fall, like you said, you kind of fall out, and like people just think you're not the good kid anymore. For other people, they might stay in the club a little bit longer, but it's not necessarily better because you're creating a double life, and people live with this fear, like, if people really knew who I was, man. And so you have this sense of like, I know I'm unworthy because the theology says I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable apart from God, I'm broken and desperately in need of fixing from God. But then you're like, I'm actually worse than that. I'm like, people don't even know the real me that's so bad. And whether you fall out quickly or you kind of stay, in people's good graces for a lot longer, it creates this problem where if it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, people need to bring things into the light, because when you have these secrets, things get so sick, they get very toxic. And when you bring them into the light, they lose their power. Like the secrets, they feel like they're so pressing. I mean, I've met so many people where they say, I had this secret, and then I shared it, like what we're going to get into in a minute with you. Like, people didn't know this, and then I shared it, and I thought everyone was going to condemn me, and then I shared it, and some people maybe did condemn me, but other people said, you know what? I went through the same thing. You're normal. You're absolutely perfect just the way you are. You're doing the same thing I did. It'll get better. And I love the idea of telling people, bringing people to the point of saying, let's bring things into the light, because they will lose their power over you. Anyway, take us into the next, if you want to respond anyway, and then take us into the next level.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see here. So where were we? Like right after everything had stopped, basically. Right. Okay. So I left the youth group. Went on to go to culinary school. Well, I guess before that, during the cigarette and the youth group getting kicked out of time, I'd also started smoking weed a lot. That was always a big thing. So that was always kind of in the background. It was never like obsessive. It was just, I would smoke on the weekends with my friends and stuff like that. So that was always a thing. And cigarettes, and ended up going to college. Was living in the dorm, and I was in culinary school. And culinary school is definitely not a place you want to go if you have an addictive personality, because a lot of people in kitchens like to do a lot of things that are addictive. And eventually, I remember at some point I think I was selling weed at the time, And one of the guys that I sold it to, he said he didn't have any money, but he had a couple pills. And I was like, I've never taken these before. So I ended up taking them at some point and absolutely loved them. So just kept asking him repeatedly for the next days on end, day after day after day. Hey, do you have more? Hey, do you have more?
Did you know what it was?
And eventually, I think it was a Percocet at some point. I
Okay.
don't know for fact, but I think it was. It had that same opiate feeling, but it was like a little pink thing. So I'd never seen it before. I'd never done anything other than smoked pot and cigarettes. I drank once in high school for graduation, and that was it. So I remember taking those pills, and I did everything I possibly could to find more of them. Eventually did. And then that started, basically I was selling pot just to afford the pills that I was buying. Going to school the whole time. I wasn't, at that point when I first started, obviously when you first start, it's not too bad. You can take half a pill for a day and not feel sick the next day. But that gets very bad very quickly. And I didn't even know what withdrawal was. Like I didn't know that was even a thing. I thought if you stop taking drugs, that's it. You just stop taking drugs. Like I was so sheltered from the Christian school and the youth group and church and not having anybody teach about those things because you can't talk about it. It's taboo. So I didn't know any of that. So when I started feeling that withdrawal at some point, I would go to class. I remember I'd be standing there and my feet would just feel like they're on fire. They feel like I couldn't stand up. I'd have to lean on everything I possibly could. My back was always hunched over because I felt like I couldn't keep it up. And I was like, what is happening? And then I would take a pill and realize, I think it's because of these. So then I realized I had to keep taking them, which really built into something very bad very quickly. That pretty much as soon as drugs started, religion wasn't even a thought in my brain. I didn't even think about it. I didn't think
this was better.
Exactly. Yeah. It was that euphoric worship feeling, only times 10, with a nice warm nap at the end. So it was always that just became the only thing I could think of. Eventually I did find like a steady connect for the pills, spending all the money I possibly could find or sell weed or whatever it was. But eventually I couldn't afford them anymore. So then I started getting sick more often, and I would start going through withdrawal more often, and then I would start missing more classes. And eventually I just kind of came clean, told my parents what was going on, told them, hey, I've been using Percocets, I've been going through withdrawal, I really need to stop this, but I don't want to go to school anymore. And I didn't want to go to school, not because of the drugs. I just really didn't like working in kitchens to begin with, even though that's what I've done most of my life. But it was more the not wanting to go to school and then also then going through withdrawal in my parents' house. I remember watching the whole entire show Dexter, I think like 3 times through, sitting on the couch, trying not to think about how death was feeling over me, if that even makes sense. But I think that was during the withdrawal was a weird point, because there were a lot of times during the withdrawal where it would be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not able to sleep, haven't slept in the past 3 or 4 days. I've not vomited or anything, but I just can't sleep, can't sit still, can't do anything, just feel like death. And I remember sitting there almost every night throughout that entire withdrawal, just 3 or 4 every single night, just praying. And I would just pray, I would just pray, I would just pray, I would just pray. And eventually, withdrawal ends. Thankfully for opiates, it's like it's one of the drugs that you can't die from the withdrawal. So that was a bonus. But after that, you feel totally fine. Everything goes away. You start to feel better over the next few days. And once the withdrawal feeling went away, I was like, oh, I'm good now. Okay, cool. So I just went right back to doing what I was doing before. I was working at the Colonial Electrical Supply, where my dad was a VP of Human Resources there. And I was working at one of the stores there. And eventually I started using Percocets again. I was able to find them with one of my friends from high school. And we would just go out and start getting high again. And eventually the pills got just so expensive that it was just ridiculous. So eventually I tricked my friend into finding us heroin, because he knew I had never, or he thought I had never done heroin, but I told him that I had, so he would get me some. So eventually I got the heroin, and that's really when things started to go downhill very, very much quicker than with the Percocets. I think as soon as I started...
Sorry, just one second. Derek, was that one of the ones that you had struggled with?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for the same reason. It wasn't Percocet to heroin though. Percocets I did for about, well, it wasn't just one. I'm sure you'd relate with this, Caleb. It wasn't always the same Percocet, 10 milligrams down here by the same person. Like, you're finding anything you can. You're making connections with people. Yeah. You're finding a 5 milligram Percocet. You got Vicodin this week. This sucks, but it'll do. You end up finding Oxycontin. Now, back when I was doing it, they didn't change the formula. It was crushable at the time, and then they ended up changing the formula, and everyone's pissed because now you got to swallow them instead of crushing them and sniffing them, and it just went on like that for a long time. And then I was doing Opanas, which is a whole nother rabbit trail of discussion in terms of how strong they are. But the day came where I couldn't afford one pill for $80. It was one pill, and we were splitting it between me and this guy, and it just made me unsick. It didn't even give me high, and I was pissed. And then the dope dealer who was selling them was like, "Look, bro, I've got some stuff. It's not much different than what you're already doing." He's convincing me to do it. And I was scared. And I went to his house, and he had some that was sniffable. It wasn't, black tar or anything. It was something crushable, sniffable. And I did this, like, the slightest little, just scared of it, And then I felt the euphoric effect. And I went, this isn't much different. All that talk, you remember how you said early in your story that your parents looked at these public school kids as these horrible people. But then when you actually got to hang out with them, you found out they're really not bad people. And you're like, wow, all that stigma. Well, there's a stigma on heroin. And in my mind, while I'm already addicted to opiates, I went and did a little heroin. And that same mindset of this huge stigma, don't do it, it's horrible, blah, blah, blah. Well, so was all the crap I've been doing. But I get why they were saying that about this, but I did it. And it was like, the way I took it in was they lied to me. They lied to me, trying to keep me away from heroin, when Percocets are, you could do Percocets, you could do this, you could do that. Don't you ever touch heroin. And when I did, I was like, those lying sons of guns. I mean, like, dude, it made me mellow. It made me feel just a little bit higher than what I would have from the pills. And I thought they had lied to me. Of course, I didn't realize what the hell was about to happen to me and how deep this was about to take me. But yeah, pretty intense.
Yeah, and I definitely had that same experience. And the first time, even though I was the one that convinced him to get it by lying and saying I had done it before, I remember getting that first bag and then putting the straw in and being so scared to do that just because of that stigma, like you said, like that there is such a bad stigma on, just every drug. Meth's a good example. Meth doesn't actually destroy your face or break your teeth. Those people are like that because they stop taking care of themselves. It has nothing to do with the meth per se. It's just they don't take care of themselves. So there's just so many weird stigmas about drugs that when the heroin was in my hand, I was at the point of almost shaking because I was scared to take it, thinking, oh my gosh, what if I die? What if I overdose? And then I was like, wait a minute, I've been taking 8 Percocet 30s a day. I think my tolerance is enough. And that's after I did it the first time. I think like a day or two later, I ended up getting more. But then I also learned the scientific part of it, where it all just breaks down to morphine in your body. So you take a Percocet, it basically breaks it down to morphine, and that's what your body uses. Heroin breaks it down to morphine, that's what your body uses. It's like almost every opiate, body breaks it down into the same base morphine drug to do the actual work. So when I learned that, I was like, well, why is heroin so much worse than the pills then? The pills come from a doctor. Okay, heroin used to come from a doctor. So that was my thought. And then that was off to the races. I was like, well, heroin used to be sold, so it's fine. I can take it. And then that spiraled downhill very fast. It got to the point where I was, snorting 14 to 18 bags every single day just to not be sick, not even just to get high anymore. Because at a certain point, your tolerance is so much. You're not getting high, you're just not sick. You just stop yourself from going through withdrawal. And eventually, you know, that just builds and builds and builds, and that just got to be too much. My parents basically were like, okay, well, look, you can either go to rehab or you can get out of our house. Choose one of those. There's no other option. So I remember the day I resigned, I went there's a college called over in Swarthmore College, and there's woods back there, and there's a cliff basically that hangs off one of the trails back there that we used to always go and smoke and stuff back there. And I remember I met my dope dude, got a bundle, which is 14 bags of heroin, went out to the cliff over there. I was just sitting there for a couple hours, just snorting heroin, smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, sitting on the edge of the cliff. And I remember sitting there for a long time, just, I don't know if I was hesitant or if I was just waiting for a chance to just push myself off. And I was very close to doing that. And I remember at that point when I was on the edge of the cliff, I was at my wit's end. I didn't want to continue. I didn't want to have to go through withdrawal again. I didn't want to have to explain everything to everybody again. And then my little sister called me while I was sitting on the edge of the cliff thinking of jumping off myself. And that really changed everything for me. That was when religion came back in full swing, where in my head, I was about to kill myself, and then my little sister calls. Like, that's not an accident. It couldn't be an accident. How could that possibly be? I mean, turns out she just called me because my mom had told her to do so because I wasn't answering my mom's calls.
But you believed that it wasn't. You believed
exactly
that it was purposeful, right?
Yeah, in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, like somebody just saved me. Somebody up there just saved me. I wasn't calling it God at that point, but something did. And that's when, so I ended up choosing to go to rehab, and then was in a place called Nearmont for 34 days. And then eventually ended up going to Florida because my insurance paid for a free flight and the insurance to go to rehab down there as well. So I did a full 64 days straight of rehab, half in Pennsylvania and then the rest in Florida. Eventually ended up going into a Christian halfway house in Florida, which was really bizarre. But that's when the 12-step program started. I really threw myself into that. The whole sponsorship and everything like that. I was super hard into that. And, you know, the God thing fits into that almost too well. You look at the AA book, and I would never tell somebody not to do a 12-step program. So right. This is totally my experience with this, and I would never tell anybody else to do what I've done. But it was always for me the weird dichotomy between the book almost referencing God so much, but then people in the meetings being like, well, you can't call it God though. You have to call it your higher power. But it's like, it says God in the book though. But you're telling me I can't say God. And it was always just kind of like, well, you're basically making this a religion when you're saying it's not a religion. You're using God. You're saying the Lord's Prayer to end every meeting. Mm-hmm. That was just kind of was weird to me, but it definitely brought me back into that religious headspace of, oh, I need to get back into this. I need to get that relationship back. And I think that's when what you said earlier, coming back to God, that's when I had that experience, was going into that halfway house where every part of it was somewhat religious in some way. We would pray every night. We would have group therapy with Bibles and everything involved. We'd go to church. We had a youth group that we would do every once in a while and stuff like that. Let me think here. And that was... That definitely brought me to a place where I thought I had another relationship with God, where I would sit down and I would read the 12-step book, and I would write out my nightly inventory and write out what I had done wrong that day and apologize to the people. And I did everything I possibly could with that 12-step program.
Can I ask a quick question about that 12-step? Mm-hmm. Is it correct that there's a section that talks about you being powerless?
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole crux of the 12-step program is you're no matter what you do, you're always going to use drugs. Like it's almost like you yourself can't control not doing drugs. You have to have God or your higher power, that he's the one that does that. He stops you from doing it. You just talk to him and believe, but he stops you because you can't do it yourself, is basically what they say.
Can I ask you guys,
that always me the wrong way.
For both of you, and I'll keep this short because I want to keep your story going, but that idea of you being powerless, it reminds me, of course, I'm sure you both know where I'm going with this, reminds me of theology. You are powerless to be righteous before God. That idea of you're broken, you're insufficient, you're bad, certainly. You don't measure up, you've fallen short, very, very, very short. Did that ever stand out to you during the process? And I know later on, as we get to your deconversion, that would, I'm sure, stand out more. But did it stand out to you at that point as like, why do they keep saying I don't have the power? And did you agree with it at that time? This idea of that it has to be from some outside source. You cannot look at yourself for wisdom, for strength, for healthiness, for wholeness. You have to go to somebody else. Did that stand out to you as like a problem, or was that okay at the moment?
For a while, I didn't think about it most. It was really that kind of wasn't really a thought until towards the end of it. I think when I first came into it, that was when I had just come back to the whole religious thing. So my mind was totally free to believe whatever anybody told me. So when somebody told me that I couldn't do anything and that I had to have somebody else do it, I was like, okay, sure, you tell me that and I'll do it. So then I followed that program and did the steps with my sponsor. But when that did change and I did start to think, well, wait a minute, why is it so black and white here? Because my sponsor, I was with him for over 2 years or whatnot, and we went through the steps. I went through all of them. I even had my own sponsees that I was sponsoring. And then he passed away. He overdosed. And he had 7 years clean at the time. He had never once mentioned that he was going to do anything. He never told anybody that he was thinking about anything. And when he passed away, that really kind of threw me through a loop. That was a really tough time. And it's not the first person I knew that had died. I mean, anybody in addiction probably owns a suit and a tie because of how many funerals they've been to. I mean, in Florida, it was, I think, over 30 by the time I left of just funerals of people I knew from meetings and everything that overdosed and passed away. And it was always from an overdose. It was never somebody taking their own life on purpose unless they overdosed on purpose. It was always an overdose. And to me, that always felt weird, where it was like, okay, but if you're saying that somebody else is controlling or is keeping me from doing that because I can't myself and I'm doing everything right, how does that person then go back to it anyway? And that the black and white of you either do it or you don't just never sat with me well, I think. Because I smoke, I have a medical card for marijuana for my migraines and my back pain and my nerve pain and stuff like that. And when I smoke marijuana, I don't instantly think, oh, let me go use heroin now. But that's what they kept telling me in the meeting was going to happen, was if I did smoke, I would instantly go back and start using heroin again. So that was always kind of a weird thought. And I think that's what pushed me away from going to meetings in general. I still do all this stuff around the meetings. Like I still do a nightly inventory here and there. I still take stock of who I wronged during the day in some way and stuff like that when I can. And I still follow the things I learned from that program. I just don't see it as black and white as yes or no or drugs or nothing.
Derek, can I just throw the ball to you for a second? How did you feel about the messages of being powerless at that time? Like, did you respond thinking, yeah, they're right, absolutely?
It's clever because I didn't think, okay, well, the theology of Christian and Jewish or Abrahamic faiths is that you're broken and you need to be fixed. it became reality that I was broken and I needed to be fixed, though, when I'm trapped and I can't stop. And everything I do to try and quit, methadone, Suboxone, other tapering methods at home, you name it. Like I tried a ton of different ways to try and quit, couldn't do it. Imodium, I took all this over the counter medicine. I tried all this stuff and I just, I couldn't do it. But I finally ended up actually cold turkey withdrawing my ass off, like horrible torments. But it was something that I can relate, where Caleb says his sister called and then everything in the universe seems to be lining up, like something's looking after you. There is a scientific I look for natural reasons now, not to just look for superficial or superstitious ones that I can't really prove. Sure, maybe there is something out there, who knows, but I'm looking for what is the cause of me wanting the universe to line up. Is there something in my mind that's only paying attention to the patterns? What about all the dissimilarities that we have that happen all the time, but only the ones we want to focus on? So that power of believing in stuff helped me, motivate me. But I was reading the history behind Bill and Bob, or if you will, Bill Wilson, the guy who wrote the Alcoholics Anonymous book. And Ebby Thatcher was the first guy who really came on the scene into Bill's life, who was a childhood friend of his in high school. And Bill always said, if I ever get as bad as Ebby, he said something like, then I'm definitely gonna have to quit. I mean, this guy's horrible. Like, he's such an alcoholic. And Bill found himself so bad he wanted to commit suicide, wanted to jump out of the window. Ebby Thatcher calls him up one day, says, "Hey man, I'm sober." And this is in the 30s, and maybe it's the 20s, the 30s, but he's like, what are you talking about? And they were drinking bathtub gin. This is during the time when prohibition took place. So you're not allowed to drink. So they're creating their own bathtub gin, buying it off the streets, like black tar heroin, like heroin on the streets, black market. It's not the over-the-counter stuff. Anyway, he ends up coming to visit him, and he's sober, and his face was glowing. Ebby's just smiling, and he's got this glow about him, and Bill's just depressed and drinking alcohol, and he slides the bottle across the table, and Ebby's like, "I'm good. I've got religion." And he's like, "What do you mean?" So he said, "Oh God." He starts sipping the alcohol, and he's thinking this guy's gonna rant with his religious stuff. This is how the story plays it out, but he doesn't rant with the religious stuff. He ends up just telling him what happened to him. He was going to court again for his alcoholic fits that he has. And these men from this Oxford group walk in and say, "Judge, let us have him under our control. And if it doesn't work after this, you can lock him up." Because they used to lock alcoholics up that were real alcoholics and throw away the key. Like, for life, you're just going to be locked up forever. They didn't treat it like an illness. They treated it like you're morally a horrible person and there's something wrong with you. You're insane or something. Lock him away. So they gave him a chance, and Ebby got it. Well, Ebby eventually ends up, drinking again at some point and dies, actually. But Bill Wilson ends up getting it, and he's thinking it's the God thing. But he was still struggling. So he found out if he shared with another alcoholic or tried to help someone else get sober, it's what helped him stay sober. The clever thing about the 12 steps, to just jump ahead, is that they use the God thing and the higher power thing, and everyone in the meetings keeps ranting this higher power thing. Even the 4th chapter in Alcoholics Anonymous is to the agnostic, okay? It's to the one who doubts there's a higher power. However, the construct of a social environment where others are there. I recently went to a meeting to pick up my 5-year chip. Okay, this was months ago. Just went and saw my old sponsor and everything. Everyone talks God. And I said, you know what? God for me is an acronym, group of drunks. And I said, man, when the group of drunks get together, we have a chance. We have a chance. It's a social thing. We're social creatures. We evolved this way. So you can imagine, I don't care if you think they always say this, I don't care if your higher power is a light bulb or a pink elephant. And some people want to argue that bullshit, that doesn't have power. You need God. You need something that really has power. Well, power is this thing right here, guys. And I learned that now. I'm like there's so much I can get lost into here, Tim and Caleb, that I just don't want to get lost into. I just want to say I used the 12 steps. Until this day, they have principles predating Christianity, predating who knows how far back in antiquity the morals of humans have evolved to saying, do each other right. Don't steal from your neighbor. Don't lie to your family. Don't lie. That's like common sense good morals that someone had built up as a social construct way back before the 10 Commandments, way back before the Book of the Dead of the Egyptians. Who knows how far back this goes? And I say that to say those principles, they talk about the 12 steps, they talk about the 12 principles. Those principles I live with because they are true. As a social creature, as someone who has to live with my neighbors and my wife and to get along with the world I live in, those are true, regardless of a God or not. So, it's just that's my own little thing, and I can get all into this stuff, but I don't want to tell people that they can't believe in something, Tim. I'm not trying to say that at all. In fact, I felt like at first I needed to have hope into something bigger than me. I was itty bitty in my head.
Yeah.
And thinking it was God when really it was other people. So, it was me willing to latch on and listen and be able to finally stop being a black sheep and just try to walk along with the rest of everyone else. The way I looked at it, man, I found a sponsor, Caleb, that was the most rough and tough, beat up dude in the room who made it. I went up to him and said, dude, if you made it, I know I can make it. So help me. And I did go through the steps. I did the 12 steps a couple different times. I had 2 years clean one time, relapsed, and then that's the heroin, and I was injecting it and stuff, and it got real bad for a long time. But then I ended up making it again. And I don't knock people, man. Like I said, Tim, like people are going to believe in stuff. And I love that your channel, Harmonic Atheist. Okay. It's all about beliefs. It's all about like how horrible these systems can be. And you can see the issues of it. But at the same time, as much as I can go and look at people like Dr. Mark Solms, who's like a brain specialist in understanding where consciousness comes from in the brain, all that's cool. Let's say we found the spot in the brain where consciousness is. We know exactly how everything works naturally. In our experience, how do we apply in our life? How are we applying these things so that they're helping us as humans go? I mean, I had a little discussion for about an hour yesterday with Dr. Price's wife, and we were going back and forth, and I'm like, I'm looking for a natural. And she's like, well, there's consciousness. And she's going into these like things beyond us type thing. And I said, could be. And I get it. Like sometimes people need that to go and think bigger than themselves. But like, I guess it took me a year to kind of be able to chew and swallow as a religious person my whole life, the reality of what might actually be taking place. Does that make sense?
That's good. That's very good. I'm just going to add real quick too. Now I want to throw it back to Caleb in a second, but I think my passion, and I know Caleb, you probably haven't seen my channel too much. We're just getting acquainted, but my passion is certainly not to say that there's no mysteries of the universe that aren't explainable. Like Derek's saying, there's people that want to have reason to believe stuff, and more power to them. I think my driving passion is definitely to bring all the information to the table, which I know Derek would share that. Just people can do with it what they want, but let's bring all the info and put it on the table. And I have a short story I want to share about mine, and then I want to get to your deconversion. But I struggled with a very severe insomnia for almost my entire life. When I was a little boy, the day in math class when you learn how to take a fraction and make it into a decimal, like 3/4 equals 0.75. The day that I learned that, I mean, the minute that I learned it, my mind grabbed it, and I started doing it like a beautiful mind kind of stuff. I couldn't let go. I couldn't stop. I could not sleep at night because I was doing math facts in my head and finding, shortcuts and patterns. And it didn't last too long. It was about a year, and the math facts kind of faded. But when that year was over, I still couldn't sleep, and I got worse and worse and worse with my insomnia for 25 years. And I remember, being on every therapy, every medicine you could find, and the church where your dad and I had been after your dad moved on, the next pastor, he was real big into this idea that if you have something, psychosomatic, it's because there's something on your conscience. You can't sleep because you're holding sin in your heart. And I remember thinking, I guess, he's a pastor. He's telling me the truth. I guess it is my fault. I don't know what it is, but it must be my fault that I can't sleep. And, if I just found that sin, I'd be good. And it got worse and worse. I'd get out of bed in the morning and hadn't really slept all night. I'd collapse on the floor. And in my late 20s, a friend got me in touch with a special doctor here in Georgia who he said, I can fix that with absolutely no medicine, and I can do it very quickly. I was like, what? I've had this for 25 years, and always medicine. But the reason I say bringing medicine is some of it was pretty strong. I don't know the drugs the same way you all can talk about it, but they said that some of them were level 4 narcotics. And I remember one I took, and I swear I saw pirates around the bed. It was very real to me. And I had hour-long phone calls that I couldn't remember having. But fortunately, I got off of the strong ones pretty quickly. So I moved to Georgia, and this doctor, he looks like he does stuff that you'd think this guy's a quack. What is he doing? And did these weird tests for like 3 hours. And at the end, he's like, yeah, I can fix this in a month with no medicine. And sure enough, he starts getting me on this regime. And I'll tell you about another time. We'll do a longer series on that sometime. But within a month, with zero medicine, I can sleep again after 25, 30 years, just like that. And it wasn't a sin issue. And at the point of bringing that is to say, I feel like it's so cool to talk about the issues and the medical and the physical issues, but I do bring it back to this issue of let's get to the truth of the matter. And I guess that might be a good place to pass the ball back to you and say, what truths did you discover about the world, about your worldview, about the universe, about yourself that helps you to move forward at that point?
Yeah, I think the death of my sponsor, Sean, at the time really pushed me away from believing in a higher power at that point. I don't think I would have called it God at that point either. It was still just kind of that, well, I don't know what's out there, but something made this. I just don't know what did. That was my opinion. That's what I always told people. But at some point, it really went from thinking like, okay, this is an accident to, well, wait a minute, though. If I think about this logically, let's see here. So just based off physics alone, what the Bible says is almost impossible in a lot of ways. And when the science part of this stuck into my brain, because I started watching YouTube a lot. When I first moved back from Florida, I had, I think, three years clean at that point. Still am minus the marijuana today, even though I don't pick up chips just because of that. But I still do. And then everything I had been told about a God or about how God works or about what happens with every religion. And then every other religion came into my head too and went, well, wait a minute.
Pick me.
Why is Christianity the one? Yeah, it's like, why just this one? Why is this one the right one? Why isn't Hindu the right one? Why isn't being Muslim the right one? How do you know? Who's supposed to know? How can you tell? And all of that stuff just kept piling up until eventually I landed on, I forget. I think I watched a bunch of Richard Dawkins.
Oh,
and I watched him speak.
Bad news. Bad news.
You sinner, you.
Here we go.
And it was just crazy stuff that these guys are saying, and it's just like I don't see how science allows for any of this religious stuff. Science doesn't allow for supernatural. If it doesn't allow a ghost, why would it allow a God? If it doesn't allow walking through walls, why can't we have somebody that can be everywhere at once? That just didn't make sense to my brain, and that's when it really started to become something of, oh, wait a minute, I don't think I believe in this then. If science is so blatantly pointing out the fact that this isn't really true, and then there's all the lack of evidence of slaves in Egypt at the time anyway, I mean, that blew me through a loop. The fact of no evidence from the Israelites leaving Egypt to the land of Canaan, no real evidence there to show all these people walking through the desert for 40 years. You'd think there'd be something. Mm-hmm. And when that kind of stuff came into my brain, that really just, it was out. I mean, I was so close to not believing anyway at that point that when I really started to really think about it deeper than just a feeling, when I thought about it as a real thing, that just doesn't work. It doesn't work. I've never seen anything like that happen. People always talk about how they've seen miracles, and it's like, what miracle have you seen? Are you talking about the guys that scream and yell and then push you over and you do it because groups think and you're just going with the flow? Like most of the time, those people that kind of experience happens to, they're not actually having an experience. Groups of people tend to go with each other. They tend to follow and almost go in like lemming kind of thing, where if one person is doing something and everybody is involved, somebody that's there, even if they're not really feeling it, they'll still get somewhat involved in some way. And that just always just didn't make sense to me. And the science was really the main key to saying that I do not believe. I don't believe there is a God. I don't believe that this was created by some being. I don't believe somebody has a plan for me in my life like everybody's always told me there was, and all that kind of stuff just all came crumbling down in a very quick succession.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
I know we kind of wrapped up the harder parts of the drug addiction topic, but just to kind of put one more question in there, did that idea of maybe this isn't real, and I guess the implication of either I don't know who God is, if it's not Yahweh and Jesus, then I don't know who it is, it's some higher power, or maybe it's just nothing, maybe it's not there at all. Did that knowledge scare you in terms of the drug addiction? Like, who's going to help me now to get out? Was that part of the equation, or was that not relevant?
No, honestly, I didn't really think about that, because I think when I did think of a higher power, the higher power was just always automatically God. I was never the one that was like, oh, the doorknob's my higher power or somebody else. It was always just God. Okay, this is just God. So when I stopped thinking that, it was more the opposite of scared. I was more excited. I was more like, well, wait a minute, hold on. So if you're telling me that this wasn't all purposely created, why are we here? How did this happen? Science is amazing. The evolution is amazing. All these evidences of how the world was created and how life came to be, and all this kind of stuff just kept piling up and piling up. And YouTube, honestly, was just the key factor to that. I really hadn't thought about the science side of things. I was always into science as a kid, and I always watched the History Channel, but I always watched Ancient Aliens. So I mean, that's not the most factual thing you can watch, but I always had that feeling. And so when the science really started to build up, that's when it was just goodbye God. Let me dig into every single bit of physics and science I can possibly get my brain around. So
that's awesome. And I'm just curious, as you were starting to think through whether or not there really was a God, and for sure at least whether or not the Bible was true, did it scare you, the implications at all of, like, for example, number one, just the immediate ramifications of what are my friends or family or people I've connected with on a Christian level, like what are they going to think about me? The whole, like, if you're in a Christian school versus public school, that's a big differentiation for a lot of people, but Christian to atheist is like, you're talking about another planet now. So it can be very scary. And then were there any personal ramifications, like, what if you don't go anywhere after you die? Does it scare you that maybe there is no afterlife? I mean, I know people don't necessarily always deconvert and come to that conclusion. They say, I don't know what happens after death, but I think there's something. I think there's got to be something that happens. This doesn't make sense to me without some kind of next step. And other people, though, like myself at this point, would take more of a Richard Dawkins perspective of, no, when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. You're gone. You're as good as if, as if you were a different animal, if you were a Neanderthal or another primate. When they die, they're gone. Did any of the ramifications scare you at all, to think, if this is true, this is a bit of a mind job right now. I'm kind of getting, I just got jacked back into the matrix and they're trying to upload jujitsu into my head in 10 seconds. Like, this is going to hurt a little bit, even though it might be the best thing for me.
I think it again was almost the opposite of that. I was more excited again. It was really a lot of excitement. It was a lot of excitement, a lot of intrigue, a lot of just curiosity, just total curiosity killed the cat on me, and I just could not get that thought out of my head. So as soon as all that came in and God left, it was just gone. I remember I didn't actually tell my parents for a while. My dad knew that I wasn't religious. I think my mom knew too. Actually, just the other night at dinner, I told them I was an atheist. I think that was the first time I ever said it to them out loud, which was interesting. But there was never really, because I think a lot of the friends that I had that are still religious, I've not talked to them in years at this point. The ones that aren't religious, I do still talk to. So nobody that I really was friends with at the time that was happening was in a place that would have been like, oh, well, what's wrong with you? Or any kind of repercussions. It was just more of like, okay, I'm an atheist now. And my friends were like, oh, well, welcome.
Well, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask for Derek's thoughts on this too after you respond. But was there any struggles with feeling angry at the church for, I guess in my words, you can put it in your words next, but any kind of deception or time lost? Like I could have been focused on being a whole person without the theological construct that included everything from the bizarre stuff like talking snakes and donkeys to the more concerning things like genocide, slavery, land theft, kidnapping, child brides, stoning, genital mutilation, to name a few, to the whole, blood magic and scapegoating, which is at the core of the gospel. Did any of that stuff come to light? Like I could have been focused on, like you said, science, or I could have just been focused on making myself whole without thinking I need whatever, fill in the blank, blood magic to be a good person again. Did anything like that come up, or were you pretty much, did you just kind of, like some people just kind of like, I don't care what my old life was like. I know I'm free now. I'm not angry, whatever. You all have a nice, life with your beliefs. I have different beliefs and I'm fine. But some people, myself included, felt a little bit, not angry, like I want to go fight with somebody or debate them, just more like, man, that kind of sucks that I was 43 years old before I deconverted. Like I could have been spending my time focused on reality.
Yeah, and I definitely at the very beginning of personally saying to myself that I do not believe. When I first told myself I am an atheist, it was never an anger towards anybody. I don't resent any of it. Nobody was purposely pushing me into a church to purposely do something. Like for the most part, at least from the people that I knew in the church, they were genuine. They weren't the hypocritical Christian that does and says different things. So that really kind of never came into my thought process of hating or being angry. I guess I was a little taken aback by just how much time I spent reading the Bible or doing other things with God in some way or with the church in some way that, yes, I could have been doing something different. I could have been learning something different. I could have been exploring different paths of life instead of just the purity Christian life. And so it was never a resentment, but it was always kind of like I wish I could have done something different, but I don't hold a grudge. I'm not good at holding grudges. So I've never held a grudge towards anybody that was still in a religion. I think it was more so an empathetic feeling towards the people that were still religious. It was more so me going, okay, well, I know I don't believe, but I know what these people believe. I know it very well what they believe. I know it myself because I did, and I know what they feel, and I know the shame and the guilt and all the anger and hatred that really does go into religion. There's a lot of that in there. And that was always kind of the feeling. It wasn't anger. It was just, I feel bad that there's so many people that are still feel like they're so torn down and just a terrible human being just because the pastor tells them they did something that shouldn't be done based off a book from 1,000 or thousands of years ago. So it was never a resentment. It was always just an empathetic feeling towards the people that were still involved.
That's awesome. I would say just for me, it was also like turning it back to me. I was angry at myself in a lot of parts. Like I was like, I should have known better. Like, I mean, just to be really kind of oversimplifying it and not to sound stupid about this, but just like there was talking snakes in the first chapter or two. Like that should have been a tip off. This wasn't real. And I'm like, what were you thinking? And like genocide? I mean, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. What a cool song. And then they go in and slaughter everybody. But keep the little girls who were virgins. Like, come on, this should have been a tip off that something else was going on. Derek, did you throw the ball? Did you have any sense of like the loss of time, or just the frustration as to why didn't I figure this out earlier?
No, not a single bit. And the reason, I got into apologetics for a while. I was being taught by a guy named Thomas McCuddy, who was at the college I was going to become a pastor. In the same vein of like Frank Turret, Ravi Zacharias, all these guys, like they're all like this. He's a disciple in that same vein, and I was a disciple, so to speak, of him. And I guess what it did for me is it like I'm extreme. So I'm reading, imagine, those like pictures that are all puzzle looking and you can't make out what it is, but they say like, if you stare hard enough, you'll see the illusion that's there. And you're like, oh my gosh. Well, I'm reading this Bible and I see it for this thing like my whole life. And then abracadabra, you start to see the Bible and you're like, I did not know the magic trick. Like I didn't know that this was to be understood like this. I have always saw it as this image painted by everyone else, and they all see the same image. They're tricked just as much as I am. They're not even knowing what it is. That's when it was like, holy crap, I'm not a good magician. And the reason why is I want to tell everyone the magic trick. I want to tell them how it's done. And I wasn't the guy who's just, like I wouldn't have been a good mystery school leader, because you're not supposed to tell the initiates or people who are just basic level. They got to get this one message, but the real secrets are for the top dogs. I wouldn't have been good at that. And so that was for me. I got excited. And I think I owe it to apologetics in a sense, because when you're studying this stuff, like you are finding not only ways to try and defend this picture that we all look at, okay, but you're also learning how to poke other religions. Well, as soon as you use those tools that someone taught you how to use on your own book, you go, oh, crap. Like you said earlier, Caleb, it's like, why not Buddhism and Hinduism? Why not Judaism? Why not, the Muslim faith? Why not these? And you can see clearly like why you have problems with them. You've been taught why you have problems with them your whole life. But then you start looking closely and you go, oh, let me turn these tools back on my own thing. The one place you really don't want to do is the Jews. The only place you really want to get them as a Christian is how they missed all those Old Testament passages that are talking about Jesus. The way that the way that Christians understand that to be. But someone said, well, then why does the New Testament look so much like the old? Why is that? And I'm like, dude, have you ever read something and then just wrote after you read it using what you just read? It's so easy to continue the thought when you have a book that teach you how to do this shit. Anyway, it's like, it's so common sense, but they're like, how come Jews can't see it? And they don't want to poke at the Exodus like you did earlier. I was going to say something interesting, Caleb, that I thought was funny. It's like, you're like, did this really happen? Let's say it did with like 40 people. How special of an Exodus would that have been? I mean, like, how, and there wasn't really these miracles and stuff. Like, would you believe this stuff? Would you, as a Jew, would you, as a Christian, actually believe this book if you found out all the magic, all the hype, all the mythology? Take it out. No one's swallowed by a whale. No one actually resurrected someone named Elijah or Elisha. No one actually split the Red Sea or stood up to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And God defeated his 10 deities that were in Egypt, the 10 plagues. Like, when that's gone, what do you do? And last thing, I know why I believed in a talking snake, but I get what you're saying. Once you see the other side, you're like, I didn't know to think of this as a different kind of genre or possibly mythology. So when someone told me, it was the magic trick that did it for me. It was never a bitterness. I don't even have bitterness today. It's like, I just want to tell them different potential ways to look at the image they've been looking at all along. And that alone should do some damage enough to make them go, but then what? I can't let go of my friend, my invisible friend. How can I emotionally adapt to the world? And then you fall in love with yourself, and you fall in love with a whole new crowd of people that doesn't say you can't think like this, or you can think like that, or you're not supposed to do this, or you're supposed to do that. You start opening up your world.
Yeah, good points.
You know.
I think the other side of the whole regret thing for maybe, I'm glad you don't regret too much. I think not regretting stuff is probably a much healthier choice. But the other part of it that was hard for me was realizing I'd been part of actively deceiving other people by being in ministry. Fortunately, it didn't go too far. I didn't go anywhere near as far as I would have wanted to go at that point. But I've gone back to some of the kids that I've been able to find. Some of the kids in the youth group that I found that I taught years ago. I've been able to find them and connect to them and say, hey, I know you may not be able to receive this message, but I'm sorry for what I did. What I did was not intentionally deceptive, but I did teach you something that was not correct, and I didn't know what I was not fully aware of what the Bible was, where it came from, its origins. I now see that I should not have been preaching, so to speak, until I knew what the hell I was talking about. I thought I did, but I didn't. And I mean that concept, honestly, it gets deeper. And I know, Caleb, this is probably, some of this might be newer to you if you haven't like followed Derek before or gone down this route. But if you really get into this, and I just want to take a quick second, then I want to go into two final topics real quick. The New Testament, especially, and that's it's where we're focused because it's the Jesus story, but it has influences and even direct quotes that are so different from what we were told. Most people don't know how much Aristotelian, Neoplatonistic, Pythagorean, and Stoic philosophies are woven all through it. Even direct Pythagorean references are like John 21, where it says 153 fish. Luke 1 or 2, where it talks about all the ages of Anna did this when she was married this many years, and she was a widow for this many years, and she was in the temple for this many years. Like, you look at that, a Pythagorean person, which ding ding ding, the Essenes were Pythagoreans, but any Pythagorean would have looked at that chapter and said, oh yeah, you're using our numbers, you're talking our language. And of course, Revelation is Pythagoreanism on steroids. But there was Zoroastrian and Egyptian influences that just abounded. It copies directly from a lot of the Greek mythology, as I'm sure you know, from Mithraic beliefs. Luke and Acts are heavily based on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, both in structure and detail and in quotes. The Gospels quote from and borrow the storylines from Euripides and Virgil. The Gospel of Mark is structured according to the zodiac in the correct order of the constellations. The author of Luke borrows from Josephus. The author of Luke also may have been Plutarch, or at least heavily aware of Plutarch's writings because he copied from Plutarch. The New Testament quotes extensively from the Qumran or Dead Sea Scrolls community, from the community rulebook, from the Temple Scroll, the War Scroll, the Songs of Sabbath Sacrifice, etc. They quote or plagiarize from a lot of the other. I always get confused if they're apocryphal or deuterocanonical or whatever the word is, but it quotes from Enoch 100 times in the New Testament. It quotes from the Wisdom of Solomon, from Sirach, Baruch, Esdras, Jubilees, many times, Judith, Tobit, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, the Assumption of Moses, the Book of Jasher, the Life of Adam and Eve. I mean, it's like you read this book and it's got hundreds of quotes from other sources and you don't even know what you're reading. It weaves in gematria or Jewish numerology, and early Kabbalah plays a huge part into it. They didn't tell us that there's like 40 books, 40 different Gospels. Over 40. There's like 6 books of Acts. Who picks which Gospels are correct? There's forgeries and counter forgeries all over, including inside the canon. There's extensive astrotheology woven in. It could go on and on, but I think just this idea of like getting the truth out there, I feel like I wish I could go back in time. And I know you shouldn't do that. No one knows what might have been and blah, blah, blah. But I struggle with the guilt over teaching people stuff without having anywhere near enough information to make a good decision, especially when you're saying, basically, I want you to swing out into eternity on what I just preached to you. But anyway, to get us back to the main story, I wanted to ask about 2 things. You guys alluded to something that was one of my last 2 points, the idea of the addiction, but I wanted to just flesh it out a little bit and see what you think. Christianity as a whole could be seen as an addiction in this sense. If you are a little kid and you do a nice drawing, you draw this nice spaceship or something, and you show it to your parents, what do you think? And if they were to say, so, you're an average artist, but I don't really like it, you'd be crushed. But of course, no good parent would ever do that. They'd say, oh, that's awesome, sweetie. Nice work. Do another one and keep going. You're just doing so good. And it does have this like chemical part of it and just this affirmation of like, oh, my daddy loves what I did. My daddy loves me. My mom is so proud of me. And you get that and you translate that on a much higher level to, if I go to church, if I do my devotions, if I pray, if I put money on the plate, if I, do whatever, if I memorize some verses, my sky daddy's looking down at me saying, I'm so proud of you. Good job, good job, good job. And you do that from, day one, when you're 2 and 3 years old, bam, bam, bam. You want to please your parents. You want to please your real parent up in heaven. That addiction is real. It's like you really, really, really want this sense of, I want my daddy up in heaven, up in space, to look at me and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And what do you feel like that's accurate to say that Christianity itself, for many of us, can or could have been an addiction in and of itself?
I definitely do agree with that. I mean, going back to the worship thing, leading worship was euphoria. It was literally like getting high. It wasn't actually taking a drug, but it's the same kind of dopamine explosion that you would get from doing drugs, just not as strong. But for me, that was enough, and that's why I kept going. I didn't go to church because I liked the sermon. I hated that part. I would usually fall asleep or go outside and do something different and come back at the end for worship. So, like, the music was always that thing that just always brought me back. And when the music stopped, that's when I stopped going. So, I mean, that's almost dead set like an addiction. I kept going for that one thing because it felt good to do that one thing. And when that one thing was gone, I didn't go back anymore because it didn't feel as good.
Yeah. And it feels like, Derek too, did you ever feel like, as you look back on it now, that it's almost like it's preying on some of people's best instincts and just preying on their neediness? I know when you look at people that are, needy and broken in that sense, just theologically, they think that's where they're coming from. But even just physically, they're like, I've got a broken marriage or a broken relationship. I'm used goods, I'm damaged goods. I feel sinful. My finances aren't good, or my medical's not good. I'm just like, life's not going so good. And you bring someone into a worship service and they say, God is going to restore the years the locusts have eaten. God is going to make whole all these things. Just turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look at his glorious face, his grace. And it's like waves of peace just flow over you. And you get people that are desperate for help. And that's like their 12-step plan. Like, oh yes, I can feel good about myself again. Did you ever feel that way when you were kind of escaping? Like, we're preying on people's best emotions and best instincts.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it like that. It took me deconverting, if you will. It actually really dawned on me. It slowly dawns, and like when you leave, it takes a while for you to see some of the stuff. Like what I see right now is not what I'll know in 10 years. I'll be laughing about, I thought I knew something then, but it hijacks all of the same things that addiction hijacks. Everything from sex to food to the way you feel, emotions, everything. So the same thing that the addiction does, that the drugs do, it hijacks all the same things. And that's one of the things Andy Thompson, who was talking about this stuff, he's biologist, he's a psychologist, but he's big into the biology of these things. And he's an MD, and he's like, yeah, all the same brain, the dopamine, as you described, Caleb, all of these things, it gets hijacked through religion. But it all started in song and dance and chanting and whatnot back in East Southern Africa, that we know of, probably earlier than that, is a survival mechanism. So they're taking instinctual things and they're hijacking those instincts, which is why a heroin addict such as myself, or a meth addict, is willing to go 10 days without eating or sleeping or sex or any of those things that are primal to us. You don't need them. It hijacks them. I don't need to eat. I'll get skinny. Don't worry about taking care of my teeth. I'm good. Until you end up seeing demons and going into a psychosis, and then the Christians have to go, see, demons are real. And it's like, bro, he's hallucinating. Oh, they're real? And then you can get into some other stuff, but you kind of point out, like, the brain has all that is necessary to concoct the supernatural on its own. Yeah. It isn't required that there's really supernatural things out there in order to prove this. Just don't go to sleep for 10 days and you'll find God, and you'll see the demons or the angels or the elves or the leprechauns and the unicorns. You'll find all that you want to find out. Just don't sleep long enough. Or, as the Bible tells us, why don't you go for a long fast? in sackcloth and ashes in the midst of the wilderness. You'll find God. I mean, so look, the brain has everything we need, I think. And that's what I think right now,
It's interesting that you say that. This is a side note, but I think there was one of the main Dead Sea Scrolls scholars had published a book about the magic mushrooms being a part of the story. And
Right.
I know some other people would say no. It was a small side note at best, but it's interesting to think about whether or not it played
Even
a
if
part of
they
these
didn't.
visions.
Yeah, even if they didn't, Tim, there were so many in Egypt, we know for a fact in mystery cults, there was definitely practice of psilocybin, psychedelic trips, whether it was a juice, a drink, even marijuana they found the high priest of Israel were using on an altar. So it's like,
Well,
yeah.
even the Greeks before then were taking hallucinogenics with the oracles and everything, and they would go to these special places for that, and that was their communion with their higher power at the time. So it's fascinating. When I started learning about all this stuff, pre-Bible history, like all that kind of religious stuff they did back then, and then seeing how different pieces of each one of those in that area then got written by a bunch of Israelite tribes people into a book,
with their best interest in mind.
Exactly. They're thinking about their tribe. They're not thinking about anybody else. Everybody else is the enemy to their tribe. So that book that was written for their tribe is then somehow put into the 21st century, where tribes are very rare at this point. They do still exist, but are not what they used to be. We have a huge understanding of science and the history at this point, and it's just still fascinating to see all this stuff that was just kind of cherry picked and then thrown into this book. And now everybody has a different interpretation of it. That really always made me. I think that's the one part of religion that does make me mad, is every single person has a different interpretation. How can you have a book? Like if you were reading The Lord of the Rings and you get to the last book and you finish the book, your other friend finishes the book and you're both talking about it and you're like, yeah, at the end of that book, Frodo just took the ring and went home and it was a cool ending. And the other guys will, no, wait a minute, he threw the ring in the lava. And you're like, well, there's a line in page 3 of the last chapter that points to them actually not doing that, but just thinking about it. So they just wrote it in there just to have it as a story and a parable, but it didn't actually happen. Like that kind of, just that cherry picking of, I'm going to take something from a different place to make that place seem okay. And all the gay conversion therapy stuff is just infuriating, and just all that kind of stuff. That's what really makes me mad about religion. It's just all the trying to punish people for being a human being. It just doesn't make sense to my brain. It's like, if people have emotions, people have feelings, everybody has a different opinion on some level, and yet you somehow think that your different interpretations of the Bible are all going to equate to the same belief system, when they don't at all. And how do you have one book that has so many different divisions to it? That just always confused me.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think a lot of Christians too would be surprised if they just did one thing, and that is just really study Second Temple Judaism, meaning the history of it and the books behind it. If you really understand Second Temple Judaism, even if you didn't get yet to Mithraism and all the other Greek mythology and all that, if you just studied Second Temple Judaism, Christianity changes radically. I mean, radically. But I know we've gone through a lot of stuff, and I've kept you guys both for a while. I want to wrap up with just one topic, and I'll throw it to Derek here, and then Caleb, I'll have you answer the same question and wrap us up. We've talked about a lot of stuff, basically ranging from Christianity to drug addiction to deconversion and other topics in there. But one of the things that kind of happens throughout all those is people realize that they're restarting, they're hitting a reset button, so to speak. They're reclaiming their identity, and they're saying, I kind of like to borrow from Yoda, you're unlearning what you've learned, and now you're replacing it with something different. And you are saying, whatever I thought about myself, my identity was in Christ. I was truly a child of God, and my identity was formed strongly based on my relationship with Him, and in my not just my judicial relationship with Him as a child of God, justified by faith alone through Christ alone. And that he was going to someday sanctify me holy and make me glorious in heaven. But that in addition to that, like there's just this personal daily walk with Christ where like it's, you know, if you talk to somebody every day, you pick up on their lingo. You know, if you and I, Caleb, if we hung out every day and you had something you said, probably within a month, I'd start being tempted to say it. Like, oh, that's a cool saying. Caleb says it. And I start saying it too. And you kind of start saying what God says, so to speak, in the Bible after it, and you're kind of repeating it, and it becomes part of your identity, your psyche, your verbiage. And you realize later, like, that identity is based on nothing. It's as good as if I had an identity based on the tooth fairy. And it's in some ways arguably much worse. And so you're like, you're kind of vacating that out, but then you have to replace it. And a lot of people are very quick to admit that that process is sometimes, it's painful in the sense that you need to heal from certain things, if nothing else than just the reality that you are figuring out stuff much later in life than maybe you should have. So my question, I'll start again with Derek here. How did you start to reclaim your identity? And was there any kind of healing that you felt like you needed to go through? And if you want to, bring in the way that drug addiction may have affected some of that, but how do you reclaim your identity after drug addiction, after deconversion, just to become the healthiest, best version of Derek Lambert that you can be?
Well, I have to give it to addiction and the constant failures of being able to stay clean on saving me from being dogmatic with my religious beliefs. It was the constant falling and the constant struggle that made me reevaluate what I believed and say, am I right? And I change my beliefs a little, or I try to focus on a new doctrine, or I try to, is it predestination? Like, hey, Jesus, what am I getting wrong here? It's like a Frankenstein experiment. When are we going to get him to come to life? If I add that screw in there, will that work? And I think the final straw was seeing the comparative religious stuff. And I always identified with the tribe of Christians. I always identified with I was right and they were wrong. Everyone else was wrong. Even within the tribe of Christianity, Catholics were damn wrong. I'm a Protestant. And just my point is I kept on identifying as part of a tribe that even the tribe itself, if they really wanted to evaluate, unless I was doing really, really what they see as their tribe and the way on the outward is identifiable, they probably wouldn't accept me as part of their tribe. I never fit in, which is why I said I never knew who I was. It was always something that but I'd always wander outside the tribe to hear things, to be open-minded. I wasn't so closed-minded that I did what they said and don't ever even pay attention to anything. I was listening to Slipknot when I was 13 years old. I was jamming it. Give me a 5-5-5. Give me a 6-6-6. I'm doing my thing, and I talk about Jesus at the same time, like it was something that I wrestled with. And I think what happened to me was when I started to see other religions and other tribes, and they did the same things that my tribe was doing, you kind of realize cognitive dissonance. And that's where, like, the whole what am I angry at? I think cognitive dissonance is a big thing, because I wish more people said I don't know instead of, oh, we know, we have it, you need to come here because I know. You don't know what you're talking about if you think that. Like, you might know some things, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like, to have all that figured out and to be so certain about something you've never seen, and if you have seen it, you were probably tripping, or something. Like, there's some explanations that probably have a natural one. I found myself realizing I'm not in a tribe of this or that. They may claim this or that. I'm in all their tribes, and they don't even realize it. I'm already creating a new group, and it's universal. I am part of the human tribe. I am bigger than that. And so that's when I was able to accept them for who they are, no matter what they believe, no matter who they are. And they may not even accept me, and that's okay, because I know this is what's amazing. I help drug addicts. Nothing frustrates me more than a drug addict. I'll tell you why. Because they want to get clean, but they don't. And no matter how much you try, you got to hope that they'll get it and want it and hold it. Okay. But you want it for them. You want the hardcore Christian to open his eyes. You want the Muslim and the Jew and you want them to get it, but you can't make them get it. But you got to love them anyway. Even though you think they're maybe blind to seeing things, even though the drug addict is suffering. And the reason why I love them so much is because I was them. I was exactly where they're at. So I'm just patient, hoping that whatever it is, that light bulb that'll go off will make them realize, at least be more liberal with their understanding of what they think. I know that goes against the very book itself. Trust me, I know, because the books teach some extreme stuff, but I'd rather them be more liberal and get along with the rest of the overall tribe of humanity. And I see that happening a lot. Christianity starting to reform closer to the reality of what the world looks like than it does
Mm.
with what Christianity originally was. A cult, apocalyptic, very, very communistic. It didn't have this whole rich, I'm a pastor, send me on flights in my private jet crap. Everyone together had things in common, and there was no I have my own property. It's everyone's. And like they're looking more like us, the rest of the world. So I find myself as a human in a world full of people who think they have answers. They probably don't have a clue what they're just regurgitating the same old stuff that's been taught to them. Some stuff is true from experience. Loving your neighbor. That's common sense though. I think we all can do that even in an evolutionary worldview, because what's the best way for us to progress and to survive is to treat each other kind. Because if you mess with me, buddy, I'm going to mess with you, buddy. Like it's common sense anyway. But yeah. I could go on. You asked a question that really could take a show in itself, trying to delve and like unravel and unfold, and yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll put a pin in that and for sure save it for another time. But that's a good starting point. Caleb, what is it like to heal or to reclaim your identity after deconversion, and including if you want to deconversion in the context of recovering from a drug addiction? What does it mean to reclaim who Caleb Perri is?
I think it was a lot of just self-reflection. It was a lot of self-reflection, and then again that empathetic feeling for the other people that were not in the mindset that I was in. I never really had. I don't think I would consider when I was in religion. I don't think I would have ever considered it my identity. I would have told you I was a Christian at some point, but I never would have gone around like purposely trying to tell people I was. If you ask, okay, I'll say it. But it was never something that I identified myself as. So calling myself an atheist now, nothing's really changed all that much. I just have different views of how the world works and understand things a little bit better. So coming back to myself was more of just accepting the fact of, okay, I really don't believe at this point. I know that I have listened to these things and I've watched all these videos and I have formed my own opinion on these things and I know I don't believe. So, okay, I'm an atheist then. And that's who I am now. So I never really struggled with an identity or coming back to it. It was just almost natural, honestly. It felt more natural to say I don't believe in it than it did when I was trying to try and come up with a reason why I did in the first place. So yeah, it was pretty easy to be totally honest to walk away from religion altogether.
That's awesome. I would just add if I could, I think for a lot of us, it is different and everyone's going to be different. I know people that are going through deconversions, and I know someone even just this past week and even yesterday, it's breaking. It's breaking them inside. They feel like they're shattered. And it's hard. It's a really hard road. And other people feel like it's not that hard to wrap their minds around, but they feel like there's a lot of healing where they feel like they got messages of shame or messages of being impure, whatever it is. There's all kinds of different paths, and it feels like a lot of it can be really balanced and not as painful if you had really good parents that just loved you unconditionally, where you might be like, yeah, this theology was kind of nasty, but my parents kind of offset it, or friends offset it, and so that not everyone's going to feel it's painful, and maybe the healing is quick. But I feel like for me, a lot of it, and I'm not going to dive into this topic too deeply. This is more of a wrap up, but I ask people a lot: is teaching children the theology of Christianity a form of psychological abuse? And I don't want to answer that yet. We'll save that for the next program. But I personally do. But when you get to people like have you ever heard of Marlene Winnell, Caleb?
I've not.
She's an author and a speaker. She talks about healing from religious trauma syndrome, but she talks sometimes about realizing that you kind of need to unthink things back to your childhood and kind of be like, what would it have been like if I could, again, not attacking church or parents or family or friends that were part of this story, but just to say, if I could go back to my childhood person and speak to them myself as if through time, what message would I want to send to make them more healthy so that I could become that healthy person? To go back to myself as a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old and say, you're not broken, you're not sinful. You do have some really bad choices that you could make, and you need to make some wise choices. The wisdom doesn't come from some, crazy book, where God says, cut off the little boys' penises. Like, that's not where the wisdom needs to come from, but you can still glean some wisdom from different holy books. But, whether it's that or philosophy or just really good people around you, but you just to go back to that younger person and say, you are awesome just the way you are, without any external God, whether you think of him as a loving God or a psycho God, like without any other external person or deity, you are awesome just the way you are. And you're not like this constant message of you need something outside of yourself. And to kind of to teach yourself as a young child, so to speak, to do self-talk and say, you don't need that. And also to give people control. I love where I'll say to my kids, I'll ask them this like rhetorically, who has the power over what you believe? And they know the answer by this point. They know the answer is I do. And I'll say, does a church get to tell you what to believe? And this, no. I say, does daddy get to tell you to believe? No. Does mama? No. Does anyone know? Who has the power over your thoughts? Who has the power over what you believe? And they know the answer is I do. I get the power. And it's very equivalent to like when you teach a young child the whole idea of bodily autonomy, where you say, who gets to decide whether you get a hug? If Uncle, so-and-so comes over at Christmas time and he really wants to give, the little girl a hug, and the little girl says, I feel uncomfortable. I don't want to hug. Oh no, he's your uncle. He wants to give you a hug. No, you teach that little girl. If she says no, it means no. She gets to say, I have control over my body. And if I really don't want a hug from a guy, even a really, really, really nice guy, the answer is no. And to give them that same power to say, I take the power back. I am in control of my thoughts, of my worldview. I will listen to everybody, but I have the power to say what sounds right. And it's amazing to me the bravery that it takes when you're a Christian to look at that. Like the whole idea of, and Derek does this a lot with the field of textual criticism, where you're looking at a text and saying, I'm going to pull it apart and see what's in it. And you're implying some of this stuff doesn't sound right. And so if you're figuring, well, how did it happen then? If it doesn't sound right, what's really going on here? But if you're a conservative Christian growing up, like in a, especially a Baptistic kind of group, you just don't give yourself that freedom and authority. God speaks. He is the king. He's the judge. He's the ruler. He's brilliant. And especially as a Calvinist, he's structured this whole thing and woven it out. And he's in charge, and he's doing something amazing beyond our wildest dreams. And so, like to quote, Romans 9, who are you to question God? Does the thing formed say to the maker, why did you make me this way? Doesn't he have the right to do what he wants to do? And so if he had the right to, create this Bible the way it is and to preserve it the way he did, who am I to say that this Bible doesn't sound right? It's very, very offensive to that, previous mindset that I would have had. But to give yourself that power from day one as a child and say, no, you have the authority. If something doesn't sound right, claim it. It doesn't sound right. And I don't have to believe just because someone says you have to, or especially just because someone threatens you with a punishment of eternal conscious torment. Like that doesn't have to be your motivation. And I love being able to think about trying to kind of unweave some of that and then reweave back the truth into your equation. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of where I'm at with some of the identity issues, and I'm hopeful to get some more clarity on that as I dive deeper into it. Any final reflections on that or comments before we wrap up?
Oh, I just totally agree with everything you just said there. And yeah, I mean, it's always been a weird thing, religion, to me. It's always been that thing that's always been such a huge part until it wasn't. And then it really wasn't. And now it just completely isn't. And it was very quick. I guess the one thing that I would add is the only resentment I think I probably do have is towards the purity stuff. I think that was probably my main thing of why I have any anger towards leaving it. But again, it was always just kind of, it was there until it wasn't, and now it really isn't. So, but I really appreciate you having me on here too. It's been fun talking to you guys, and it's really nice.
Yeah, likewise. Well, maybe we could put the purity culture / shame culture and that topic on the board for another time. It'd be really good to follow up in a few months and kind of see where you're at with your journey and touch base and pick a few other topics. But I just want to say thank you both. Thank you to both of you again. This has been Derek Lambert of Myth Vision and Addiction Rewired. Is that right?
It's actually my name, Derek Lambert, but I call it Rewired Addiction because
Rewired Addiction.
Addiction, just simply put, is like a disc, those old song discs you put the needle on and it goes. Well, there's a groove and those patterns develop, which is the constant habits that we do each day. And I want to, the frontal lobe cortex and the midbrain, there's a lot of neurons that shoot and they're misfiring when we're addicts. Like I'll go still to get money to get my drugs. That's not normal behavior. That's bad behavior, but you create habits doing bad behavior. So I call it rewired addiction because you're wanting to rewire your brain into new habits, new addictions. I mean, we all have them. There's nothing wrong with an addiction. Is it a healthy one or is it a bad one? Not like I'm getting rid of all addictions in every single place in my life. You're going to end up becoming addicted doing that. I mean, like, I'm just saying you're a human. So,
Nope.
Yeah. And I just say to everybody, the biggest tool that's helped me is skepticism. And don't just doubt to doubt, but like use some tools to try and figure out what am I believing and is it right? And how do I know it's right? So keep searching.
Good thoughts. And thank you again to Caleb Perri. Again, it's just awesome to reconnect with you since your childhood, basically. I'm sure you were probably too young to remember when I did babysit with you and I went to Dominican with you, but it's so good to connect again. And I just appreciate both your dad's influence in my life. He was certainly played a mentor role for many years in many ways and helped me through. I'm sure we had a lot of deep conversations. So I appreciate your family as a whole very much. And thank you for sharing your story. And I look forward to connecting again, hopefully. And I think as you feel like if and when the time is right, I'd love to see your platform expand. And, I think people need to hear from people like you who have a story to tell. Your story is very important. So thank you for being able to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for having me on. It's been really cool. I have wanted to do something like that for a while and start something on YouTube and share that just because, there are a lot of people that are in that space that I was, where it's like, I think I believe, but it would be easy to push me into not believing. And I think there's a lot of people that are at that point that are scared to say they are an atheist or scared to accept the fact of that is because they lose the God that was hugging them the whole time. So I would totally want to do that. But yeah, I totally appreciate you having me on here. I'd love to speak again. I'd love to go more into just the addiction as well at some point, Eric. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, I'm totally down for anything you guys want to do. So appreciate having me on here.
We'll definitely do it. Thank you both again. And so until next time, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for watching. Have a great day.